It's Friday the 14th of June. This is the Climate Alarm Clock. This week's headlines: elections are over. What does it mean for the planet? Fish kills and killer pensions in Ireland. EV levies and environmental sabotage ahead in Europe. Hello and welcome to the Climate Alarm Clock, your Irish climate news podcast. I'm Darragh and elections are finally over. As we record this, we don't have the final results of all the European elections, but we have a fair idea of how things are panning out. And to discuss that and a few other environmental stories, I'm delighted to be joined by Tom Spencer today. How are you doing, Tom?
I'm good, thanks, Darragh. Well, I think we're all sort of still finding our feet, reeling a little bit maybe, but glad to be joining you.
Yeah, no, great to have you here. And just before we go into our stories, a reminder that if you want to support the work we do, you can do that on buymeacoffee.com/the climate alarm. And a huge thank you to Niall B, who bought us 100 coffees this week and said, "You're not too bad for a climate podcast. It would be really great if you got rid of the women. And if you do that, I'll buy you 100 coffees every week." So a big thanks to Niall B in Dublin. We have listened and we've responded. That is, of course, a joke. Ciara and Anna can't be here this week and we'll be back next week, hopefully. But a reminder, if you do want to support the work that we do, you can do it on buymeacoffee.com/the climate alarm. And a huge thanks to Rachel, who said, "Really enjoyed the episode I listened to, first time listener, and I'll be back for more." So thanks so much for that, Rachel. So Tom, we haven't jumped to the far right here at the podcast, and for the most part, the Irish electorate haven't either. What are your thoughts on the elections?
I mean, that's the big relief. I think we had a lot of understandable concern going in, and it wasn't just concern. We saw people putting up posters were being attacked. There was a lot of, look, let's call it what it was, xenophobia and racism that was part of it. And on the whole, what we haven't seen is this big surge of the far right. I suppose what we have seen really is stasis. You know, it's not the change that we were promised. We're sort of still stuck where we were. And I mean, you and I have been talking in preparation for this episode. I think you had some really good points where you were sort of, you know, you have the long-term view of this. This was actually my first time voting in elections, so I've been trying to catch up. But I thought you had some really great points to make.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose one thing for me is that, you know, we haven't seen that kind of rise of the far right. There was a lot of kind of racist, misogynistic, anti-migrant, anti-science, climate-denying candidates, you know, the whole raft of them across the country. And for the most part, they didn't get elected. But a couple of people did get elected. And so I think even though we haven't seen that, maybe, you know, people have commented that, oh, you know, Ireland won't move to the far right like other countries in Europe have. But we are moving towards the far right, albeit more slowly. For me, like, one seat is too many. And I suppose when you look at that with the bigger picture, you know, that's still well between 40 and 50% of people voted for Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. You know, so I think half the country are grand with how things are. I think that's that's kind of one of the takeaways for me. And then there's the other half of the country that, for different reasons, you know, people are dissatisfied, be it cost of living, the housing crisis, lack of climate action. You know, then the other half are disenfranchised and people are voting in very different ways and looking for very different solutions to that. So yeah, I guess that's my overall take and summary in terms of kind of the climate aspect. The Greens lost a few council seats, gained a couple of new ones, but overall their numbers were down. Interesting to note that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael's numbers were down on the last local election, and Sinn Féin's numbers were up on the last local election, which you wouldn't kind of gather based on some of the media commentary that we've heard.
There were wins too for the likes of the Suck Dems. You know, I think when we're talking about climate action, environmental action, there are other parties that are, as you've covered in recent weeks, challenging the Greens. Some are more progressive than them. So it's not just, you know, I suppose we've looked at the Greens for a long time because they are in power at the moment. And, you know, seeing them lose seats, we sort of, you know, you can panic a little bit. But I mean, we're all waiting to see how the European elections are going to play out. We are starting to see sort of some of those being declared. What I thought would be useful is let's look at some of the stats behind this. So we obviously always talk about it from a climate perspective, but I know everyone on this podcast is always talking about a just transition, really. So in terms of stasis, what we're talking about is in 2023, the number of Irish parents using food banks doubled. That's according to Bernardo's. There are now more than 14,000 homeless people living in Ireland right now, and that's up 14% on last year. So that's what people have voted for. And like even today, we've seen, as we're recording, this sort of narrative play out of Simon Harris saying, you just can't pitch a tent anywhere. This election was, a lot of it was focused on immigration. No, very little of it, if anything, was focused on climate action. And this is what people have voted for, is a real lack of compassion, a real lack of progress, and maintaining that stasis that we've seen. You talked about the sort of response to Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, and there is a positive here. If you're not voting for those parties, I should say. If you are, maybe it's not a positive. But what we've seen is a 13.5% drop in votes for those two parties combined over the last 20 years. So that's quite a big shift. It might feel like it is a long period of time, but that is a huge percentage change over that period. There are a few other stories that I thought were some positives that we should try and take from this. So we've got, according to National Immigrant Council of Ireland, the number of candidates from a migrant background rose from 56 in 2019 to over 100 this year. And more of those candidates were representing parties previously. A lot of them were independent. So it's good to see those main parties welcoming more people in, even if there is a bit of a toxicity around immigration at the moment. And one of them I thought we absolutely should celebrate is Cork City Council has its first ever black councillor, which frankly feels like a bit of a mad thing to say in 2024 that this is the first time. But look, this is a good news story. We should celebrate it. I think elsewhere we're also likely to see the highest number of publicly out LGBTQIA local representatives. So that's another positive. And one other thing that I thought might be a bit of a balance here is the National Women's Council had been petitioning parties to put up a minimum of 40% female representation at local government level. So what we saw was a record 677 women contesting this election, but that represents just 31% of the ballot. So it's such an up and down. We can see real positives here, but nothing has changed. It does feel like we're either where we were before, or maybe we've slipped backwards in a few places.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, I definitely think, like you said, about the narrative of migration kind of dominating a lot of the discussion, when actually, the discussion on the airwaves, should I say, where anyone I've been talking to who has been canvassing and has been on the doors says that barely came up at all. You know, that people were talking about kind of the sort of bread and butter issues, the housing stuff, the cost of living. Yeah, and I suppose we might come to it a little later, but you know, for the most part, climate action was missing or very much secondary in any of the debates, in any of the canvassing.
Just before we started recording, Mary Robinson made a speech, So she had said, we've just had our elections in Ireland.
Yeah.
Nobody wanted to know. Nobody wanted to think about it. It's not
Yeah.
easy because you want to get re-elected, and that's where we have to change. So she's talking about, look, just before this election, the EPA came out and said, we are going to miss our emissions projections. We are way off course. We're going to be hit with record fines. Where was it? It wasn't anywhere really in any of the discussions. And people have ultimately voted for people who have consistently come out as inactive at best, if not denially or worse.
Yeah. And I think, it's a really weird one, because you can see, we've talked about it before, but Eamon Ryan is basically a lightning rod for criticism when it comes to climate. And a huge part of that is because, for the most part, other parties, unless they're asked about climate change and climate action, they're not going to bring it up. The Greens obviously always bring it up, and there is a bit of a shoot the messenger kind of aspect to that. So what Mary Robinson has said is that, nobody brought it up because they were afraid that if they brought it up that people wouldn't vote for them, and that totally needs to change. And that's absolutely true. And that's something that the media really, really need to get their act together on, to hold politicians and prospective politicians to account on climate change, rather than it's still acceptable. It's acceptable and it's beneficial for politicians to continue to ignore the climate crisis. And that is just unbelievable, really, when you step back and think about it. And I think, I think you can kind of normalize it, or think it's acceptable. I've probably engaged with, I watched a lot of the election debates and stuff, and I think you kind of get swept away in the things that people are talking about, and forget, they're not talking about climate change, and then kind of almost think, oh yeah, but that's okay because there are other issues and people care more about those issues. And then I kind of have to stop myself and be like, no, it's absolutely not okay that we have this existential crisis that most of our politicians and a huge swathe of our media are just willfully ignoring. We might
It was 2019. It was 2019 that the government declared a climate emergency, the last time we had local elections. And what's happened in the interceding years? Really, in terms of what the atmosphere is taking in, nothing. Our emissions have gone up. Yes, there have been politicians with good motives who have tried their hardest and fought often against a hell of a lot of pushback, but we haven't moved anything significant in that time. And look, I mean, my climate anxiety is sort of increasingly through the roof because it's a response to inaction by politicians. And what we're seeing is just further inaction. And this is something we're seeing playing out everywhere. Look, there has been a broader shift to the right across Europe, or really worldwide. And we're still not even really talking about the climate in general, let alone the health implications of it from a breathing perspective, or what we drink or what we eat. But that mental health perspective is just being completely ignored as well. And, it really takes its toll after a while to just sit there and go, what do we have to do to get accountability, or just even to get this to register with you? Because they really don't care. That's the honest answer at this point.
Yeah, and we've seen, I suppose, we might maybe stick with the Irish context and then go back to Europe and the European elections. We've seen a couple of examples of government really not caring in the last week. One story that was in the Examiner was that the Department of Social Protection rejected a recommendation that funds in Ireland's new auto-enrolment pensions are banned from investing in the fossil fuels or arms industry. So there was an Oireachtas committee last year, a cross-party Oireachtas committee for social protection, so with politicians from across all parties, who made, I think it was 21 recommendations about this new auto-enrolment pension to increase the number of people who have a pension in Ireland, or reduce the number of people who don't have a pension. One of those recommendations was that these pension funds shouldn't invest in fossil fuels or the arms industry. And the department said no, they won't do that because they have a duty to first and foremost get a good financial return for participants. And it's important to not impose restrictions on those participants that would be different to workers paying into other private schemes. And then they go on to say that, there are other checks and balances they can put in place to ensure that the pensions are environmentally and socially sustainable. But when you think about that the Department of Social Protection are saying, yeah, no, we might invest in fossil fuels and the arms industry. What that, like, it's terrible on first listen and on first read, I think. But then when you think about it, if these pensions do have, shares in the arms industry, then all those people with that pension are essentially relying on conflicts like the conflict we're seeing in Gaza, like the war in Ukraine. They're relying on that to get a pension return. And similarly, they're relying on fossil fuel companies making a profit, which involves burning fossil fuels, obviously. So they're sort of taking away your future to give you a pension, is what they're doing. It makes absolutely no sense. And particularly when Ireland actually, made positive headlines a couple of years ago for announcing that they were going to divest from fossil fuels in their state investment portfolio. So just a mad one. I suppose the other, and it's a bad news, local Irish story, one that's definitely relevant to our local councillors, I think, is that report from the EPA on water quality that came out this week.
Yeah, so we had two really interesting water-based reports. So the EPA report basically looked and said there are no signs of improvement in Ireland's water quality in lakes, estuaries, or groundwater. While there were some small improvements in some areas, those were offset by declines in nutrient pollution. So that's coming from agriculture, wastewater, and forestry predominantly. Emma Cotter, who's the director of the EPA, she had a statement I thought was worth bringing up here. We need to see an acceleration in the pace at which Uisce Éireann is delivering improvements in wastewater infrastructure. This is such an obvious thing. What we, in the context of this podcast, we have heard politicians say, sure, we'll tackle homelessness, sure, we'll tackle wastewater, or we'll get round to setting up a pipeline all the way from basically where I am in Clare, all the way up to Dublin to provide water for the people in Dublin to drink. None of this is happening. And these aren't news stories. These are steady declines that we've seen over, frankly, decades. But this was pretty shocking. This is the latest one saying, again, we're in stasis. This is as bad as it was, if not getting worse.
Yeah, no, it is. It's, it's not surprising to hear, but it is not great news to see it. And I suppose a really shocking example of those water quality issues was the fact that that thousands of fish and eels were killed in the Allow River in North Cork, a tributary of the Blackwater. And that looks like it's as a result of spillage at the Fremount water treatment plant north of Kanturk. So that there was some kind of some leak from that water treatment plant that led to this huge fish kill of over 5,000 fish. It's also an area where that was protected for the freshwater pearl mussel. And yeah, it's really, really devastating news. In the article from the Examiner, um, there's Michael Tuig, who's a member of the Kanturk District Anglian Club, was talking basically about all the work that went into it. You know, a huge amount of work with local farmers went into improving the water quality. There were fences installed, special water troughs, silt traps, loads of stuff. And they had seen the quality improve. And now there's this spillage, and all that good work is undone. And, you know, it's so much easier to damage water quality than improve it, you know. So yeah, I suppose, you know, that's definitely an area of work for the local councillors down in Cork to be looking at and engaging with.
Yeah, and it's the same old story. Millions of EU funding went into restoring the water quality, and it's not just about money, it's about the impact on people and nature. But all this money's been wasted, and the people responsible for this, they typically get a relatively small fine compared to the amount of money that's been put in. And is it really a deterrent? Not really. It hasn't changed anything over all this time. So it does feel like we need some systemic change, and that has to really come from the top. So there is an investigation into this at the moment, and that's involving several state bodies. So there is the opportunity for what's going on. Let's have a look at it. Let's see how we can stop this in the future, and how do we really change things. But I think what we've learned is there's going to have to be public pressure on those state bodies to say we're aware of this and we need to see an outcome. There
Yeah,
has to
and
be
I think just
accountability on this.
worth kind of pointing out that, like, any of these, you know, this is an environmental issue kind of separate to the climate crisis. You know, it's happening for similar reasons. It's happening because of kind of disconnect with nature, over exploitation of our natural resources, that we're just not taking care of our water. And, you know, even if the climate crisis wasn't coming down the tracks, this is still a problem that we would have. You know, even if, for example, agriculture, you know, even if the emissions from our national herd weren't a problem for a climate crisis, there's still a problem for our water quality. So it's kind of a separate but connected issue. But the real connection is that as the climate crisis intensifies, we're going to see those natural or water resources stretched more, be it by drought, where we've less fresh water available, or be it by extreme rainfall that kind of put pressure on the water infrastructure. And we really, really, really need a water management system fit for purpose. So yeah.
If anyone can hear a noise in the background, it's Kira and Anna screaming, trying to get into this conversation away from mics, and just sort of, I can hear what they would say about these various stories. And I feel bad that they're not here to use their voices, because I don't know about you, I flip between sort of overwhelming sadness and then anger and then back again, because it just feels like feels like the same story again and again, and it feels like there's very little we can actually really do about it at our, us. As a society, I'm sure we
just
can.
I suppose
I know we can.
to go back to the start of that point, Tom, just to be really clear, when Tom said if Anna can hear voices in the background, you don't have Anna and Kira locked up in your house.
No, we haven't gone that far, right? There's no kidnapping. There's no, they're not here. But I'm sure everyone can hear in their own inner monologue what Anna would be saying at this point, because she said it so eloquently and so passionately before that. I think
what you said there about kind of swinging from kind of, you know, to sort of despair and stuff. One thing that has, you know, that I have found really heartening, you know, is the number of people who really care about issues and really, you know, really raise them during these elections, and, you know, put in the work, went around communities, knocked on doors, and even people that didn't get elected. You know, I draw such inspiration, from the kind of vision and dedication and courage that those people have. And some amazing people have gotten elected as well. So, like for me, and even kind of seeing the counts in progress and democracy at work, there is a lot of good stuff to be taken from that. And I definitely do kind of draw hope and solace from that, and also realize, like, yeah, it's good to have an understanding of where other people are at and kind of the work that needs to be done. So I'm kind of pulling the positives from that. With that, I suppose we look at the kind of European election context. So as we're recording this, the count in Midlands Northwest and Ireland South haven't been completed. So Sean Kelly has been elected in Ireland South, and as it stands, it looks like Grace O'Sullivan, the Green MEP, is going to lose her seat there. Fianna Fáil will probably keep their seat with Billy Kelleher, maybe win a second one. Mick Wallace might hold his seat. Michael McNamara is likely to get a seat. So, yeah, probably less Green voices in the government or in the European Parliament from Ireland South. In Midlands Northwest, Luke Ming-Flanagan will be re-elected, and it looks like a bit of a toss-up. There'll be one Fine Gael seat, probably two, a Fianna Fáil seat, and then maybe Sinn Féin, another Fianna Fáil, or the Irish or Independent Ireland candidate. So I suppose that's kind of going to be as you were in terms of environmental voices in Europe, I would say. And then in Dublin, that count has been complete, and probably two of the strongest environmental voices in the last European Parliament from Ireland, Ciarán Cuff and Claire Daly, have lost their seats, taken by Lynn Boylan and Aidan O'Riordan of Sinn Féin and Labour, who are both pretty good when it comes to climate stuff. I would have to say so. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's. You want to thank those that are outgoing, and sort of you want to take a moment to sort of mourn their loss a little bit. They've had to work hard, very hard, the last few years. But I think there is some hope with those coming in. You can look at them and sort of, especially Lynn Boylan has a very good record, particularly at a European level. These are just projections, but the EPP, European People's Party, so that would be the party aligned with Fine Gael, they're looking at a 5% increase with the latest projections from Politico. They are the ones who have objected to the nature restoration law. They've been blocking climate and environmental action for quite a long time. Unfortunately, it looks like the Greens are going to drop by about 18 seats. So we'll see. It's still up in the air. We shouldn't necessarily buy into all the projections. I think doing that can just set people up for a fall, or can drive you down the wrong road a little bit. But we'll see how things come out of this. I think it's going to be a hard slug, and I think what we've seen is we're already starting to see the setup of the next moves. There was a piece of news this week talking about the agri lobby, their sort of designs for Europe.
Yeah,
I guess,
so
Darragh.
this is a pretty startling story that apparently the dairy industry are now pushing Ireland to go for the environment commissioner portfolio in the European Commission. So Charlie McConalogue, the Minister for Agriculture, is in the running to be appointed as Ireland's next commissioner. And so basically there's there's a bit of a push from the dairy sector to try and get the environment portfolio to Ireland, because they see it as vital to rural Ireland's interests. The Irish Independent article finishes off by saying, with mounting environmental scrutiny and the uncertain future of derogation, the dairy industry believes that having influence over the environment portfolio could safeguard its interests. So basically, rather than taking action, and we were talking about water quality, that is affected in Ireland in part from the dairy industry, and rather than kind of taking this action, they're now looking for the Minister for Agriculture or someone from Ireland to take the environment portfolio and basically, kind of water down, no pun intended, the requirements that will be faced. So that is pretty
I
grim to
think it
see, I
was
would have to
look,
say.
it's the next step in what we've seen from them the last few years, that they have lobbied hard at a national level. They have engaged in a lot of culture wars. They've gone out, it's not all that long ago we saw social media posts being taken down about meat-free Mondays. That culture war blew up and went away very quickly, but that was led by the agri lobbies. And what I think there's something a little heartening we can take from this, which is we haven't seen the progressive action that should be taken from a scientific perspective. We are not taking enough action on climate emissions, water emissions, everything else from the agricultural sector. This feels like a very big step from them. I hope it's a slight representation of panic, or that they feel like they have to take a bolder step because it's the only way for them to safeguard against the action that has been too long coming. But yeah, if that happens, that's going to have a pretty big effect on any action that we're going to be able to take at European level for the next however many years. It is concerning.
It is, and then the other news story coming from Europe that is quite concerning, and glad to have you here for this, Tom, is the potential tariffs for Chinese EVs in the European market. Can you explain that?
So, in effect, the EU is copying what America has done, which is they are looking to impose new tariffs on Chinese products. So it is EVs, but it is also solar panels, heat pumps, even everything up to wind turbines. So this is going to be tariffs up to 38%. At the time of recording, it hasn't been defined as a specific amount, but that could be around about a €2 billion a year in extra duties.
They're basically imposing tax of up to 38% on all these products, like electric vehicles, wind turbines, solar panels, coming from China. What's the rationale for that?
Yeah, I would argue that there isn't much of a rationale. I think this is. So I suppose the rationale at a European level is this is supposedly protecting European brands. So EVs are a perfect example of this, which is we have seen the car lobby go to the European Commission and say, oh, we shouldn't phase out internal combustion engines in 2030. It should be 2035. And then actually what we had in the intervening years, nothing has happened. European manufacturers aren't providing a good range of EVs. They're not providing affordable EVs. And the EVs they're providing are not always the best quality, or they don't have all of the kit and everything else that you might want in them. So the reason Chinese EVs are selling really well here in Ireland and across Europe is they're affordable and they're better products ultimately. So
the other sort of rationale from it that they have is that they have said that the reason those Chinese EVs are so cheap is because they're getting so many subsidies from the Chinese government to produce them, and that basically that's driving down the cost so much that it gives them an unfair. Yeah. Is that right in saying that it gives them kind of an unfair advantage against European car manufacturers? So that's kind of the rationale, but I mean, in the context of a climate crisis, first of all, to me, it doesn't really make, like, I just can't, yeah. I can't understand it. Like, surely we should be matching the subsidies and figuring out ways of bringing the price down. But then is there not a huge hypocrisy? And I don't know the answer to this question, Tom, and I don't know if you know the answer, but is there not a huge hypocrisy in, for example, Irish dairy
Mm.
that is heavily subsidized by the EU being sent to markets outside the EU. Is there not a massive contradiction and hypocrisy there? I don't know. I don't know the answer, and I can't say that I know enough about kind of global markets and European markets and stuff. But
I think that's a
just find
perfect
it a bit
example. It was just
strange.
last year that Ireland was celebrating exporting beef to China, and what a brilliant thing this was for our economy with no consideration to emissions. For me, that's the climate is the most important context for this, regardless of an economic level. Because frankly, I don't care about the economic level. I don't understand it. It's too complex. These are the cheapest products, and they are popular because they're good. They're that perfect intersection between something that works very well and that is affordable. You and I are stuck at a personal level for what we can do. We try and make the changes that we can. Maybe we put a heat pump in if we can afford it. We might buy an electric car if we can afford it, and it's useful. We don't have public transport or something available to us. These are the things that are available to us, and this will add a huge amount. You're talking if you bought a entry-level electric car that currently costs €30,000, it will cost 35,000. This is dramatically going to change our ability to address the emissions that we're producing. This is slowing down the revolution that we need to see. And I think you're right. Look, yes, China has gone out of its way to incentivize these things. There is constantly this debate about what about China? China, yes, it's opened all these coal plants and it's doing this, but we also know it's invested in solar more than anyone else and is rapidly changing towards a more renewable energy economy. In Europe, our car manufacturers, because I can talk about that better than the other things, they had the lead. They had the lead for decades, but they threw it away because they engaged in delaying and lobbying. They failed to grasp how popular EVs were. Their lobbying to delay adoption of them hasn't worked. And now what we're seeing is them going, oh, this isn't fair. China have beaten us at our own game, and the only way to beat them is in a trade war. This is so pointless, and we're all going to lose as a result of it. I don't care where the solution comes from. I just care what the volume of emissions going into the atmosphere are, and this is really going to limit our ability to reduce those emissions.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the fact that you were talking about last week how how Ireland's sort of an outlier in the fact that EV sales have gone down in Ireland, and how that's linked to the fact that the grant was taken away, and now that you're potentially seeing, as you said, €5,000 on top of the cost of a €30,000 car, is is not great. So definitely, huge work to be done for the new environmentally conscious MEPs that we have in Ireland. And as I say, we've obviously lost Kieran Cuff and Claire Daly, and I think we mentioned in the previous podcast that actually the best environmental MEPs that we had in the last European Parliament, according to a WWF voting analysis, was Claire Daly and Mick Wallace. Claire Daly is definitely gone. Kieran Cuff would have come next in those. He's gone. Grace O'Sullivan also high up, probably gone. But high hopes for Lynn Boylan and Aidan O'Riordan. So yeah. Right. Some good news stories are well overdue. Good news story number one. Kira and Anna will surely be back next week, hopefully, to lighten the mood. You have a good news story or two, I think, for us as well, Tom.
I always feel like the ghost of the feast. I feel like I come here and bring a negative energy, so I want to bring some positives. Really good story coming out of Wales this week. So you might remember last year there was a bit of a fight. Wales introduced a national 20-mile-an-hour speed limit across the country in urban areas. It was more played out in the media than it was in sort of normal conversations or in town council meetings. It went ahead. And what we've seen is there has been a reduction in the number of damage claims, which for some reason has been the sort of headline for this. But more importantly, there's been a reduction in the number of people harmed by collisions with vehicles, which is a fantastic result. And we also know that lower speed zones also result in lower emissions as well. So we have this amazing national level amount of data that tells us it's better for your car, if that's your most important thing, but it is going to be better for you, for your family. You're not going to be hit, you're not going to be killed. And the emissions are going to reduce too. So that's going to benefit your health and it's going to benefit the climate. So this is a national level thing that we can learn from.
But what if I'm in a rush, Tom? What if I'm in a rush?
Also, there's no demonstration that higher speeds are going to reduce the actual amount of traffic. And I think you had a really interesting insight this week from your own native Galway, which spoke specifically to this.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like that story, I think, is such a good news story because, you see one of those incentives that there can be a bit of a culture war over. So, people arguing over speed limits and changing speed limits. And then you see, all the impacts, the climate impacts, the road safety impacts, where, all our road safety statistics in Ireland are going the wrong way. And we don't really know why, because the RSA are quite slow with releasing their data. And then you see a story in Wales that they brought this in and it had all the positive impacts that they said it would have. The Green Party lost both their seats on the county council in Galway, and there were a few people saying, right, it's time to get the ring road in County Galway. And so, what I posted was a link to an image from the engineers report that shows that when the ring road is built in Galway, the Headford Road, the road that myself and Ciara would live out at, the traffic's actually going to get worse. So all this debate is happening, about the ring road reducing traffic by kind of ignoring the evidence that that's not what's going to happen. So it's really, really good to see, evidence-based policy over in Wales having a positive impact.
So that I would recommend that people go and look at your Twitter, because this is a satellite image or like a map of Galway. And what it shows is two colours ultimately. One is blue roads, which I think is where the traffic will get slightly better. And then it's green roads, which are places where it's going to get much worse. And what we're seeing is the ring road is there are vastly more green roads, so roads that are going to get worse as a result. And they're pushing out of the city further and further and into the city. So what we're doing is creating a narrow corridor where things might get better, and then everywhere around it, even places that aren't being affected at the moment, are going to get significantly worse as a result. So it's pretty stark as an image.
Yeah. Our good news segment hasn't hasn't stayed. We haven't stayed in the good news as much as we possibly could have, but I think that news from Wales is really good to see evidence-based policy in action having the positive impacts that it said it would have. You have another good news story. I think Tom kind of linked a bit to some of the stories we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. It's a report from DSMOG, and I thought it was really interesting because it does tie into exactly what we're talking about, particularly that pension story. So at the moment, there is a concerted international effort to hold banks accountable for funding fossil fuels. So what we've seen is a lot of direct action in the last week, some of it violent, some of it non-violent. And when I say violent, I mean some windows got broken, not people being hurt. But we've seen direct action protests across the US, the EU, and elsewhere. And what was really interesting is this DSMOG article sort of puts it into context. So since the Paris Agreement was signed, fossil fuels have been invested into the tune of $7 trillion by our banks. So I would just recommend people go and read this piece. It's called Big Banks Have Funded Climate Crisis, with nearly $7 trillion since Paris Agreement. It's good news because ultimately it's about transparency. Here is this thing. We are all investors in banks. When we put our money in them, we are actively investing. And I think this is a great way for us to talk about accountability. And if our politicians aren't really willing to act, banks are all about safety for money. So they will change and adapt very quickly when we tell them what to do. So I would just recommend going and reading that because I think it is good news to have that transparency.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of linked to that, what I would see as a good news story, maybe climate adjacent, but definitely a reason to be proud to be Irish, is the Irish artists, including CMAT, Pillow Queens, Thumper, and comedian Joanne McNally, who have pulled out of the Latitude Festival in the UK because Barclays is one of their sponsors. And basically they've pulled out because the UK based Palestine Solidarity Campaign have asked people to boycott Barclays because it's bankrolling Israel's genocidal assault of Palestinians because of its connections with the arms companies that sell weapons to Israel. So so it's so good, so good to see that leadership from Irish artists, and as you say, people putting on the pressure, the kind of pressure that we need to see for climate, but putting on that pressure for such an urgent cause. So
absolutely,
so just well done to all the Irish artists who have done that, and I'm going to see CMAT tomorrow and going to enjoy the gig, I think, even more, all the more for that. Fair play to her, she's great. All right. With that, any actions, Tom? Have you any thoughts on actions that people can take?
Yeah, you've mentioned it a few times over the last couple of weeks, but the Rethinking Growth Conference, that's taking place in Dublin at Trinity College on the 25th and 26th of June. There are tickets available at the moment, and this is looking at how we adjust, how we have a proper just transition. The sort of tagline that they're working on is towards a well-being economy for Ireland, and it's looking at everything from higher education to how we promote a better quality of life for us, for people, and how we interact with the ecosystems around us. So it looks to have an amazing program. There are some fantastic people there. People like Hannah Daly will be speaking there. So I recommend that everyone goes and has a look, and it could be a great thing to sign up for and attend.
Great. Yeah. I have a couple of very small things and at least one big thing. One thing is listen to a couple of Peggy Seeger songs that I found very poignant after the last kind of week of elections and the last few months of just the general state of the world. She has one song called How I Long for Peace, and it's just a beautiful song that kind of, looks at how conflict and war and the climate crisis are all kind of wrapped up into each other. And another one is called Song of Choice, that is written in 1973 and kind of talks about the rise of fascism, basically, and how ordinary people choose to just kind of look away, and that is what kind of lets it spread. And it's just, when you hear someone eloquently kind of explaining and articulating a point as well, and realizing that people have figured this out kind of 50 years ago or even longer ago, well worth a listen. It's the solstice next week, Friday week, so just that's always a good opportunity to reconnect with nature and find a nice solstice related activity that's going on with you, and take a step back and connect with nature. And then the last action that I have put down is I've written it, and it's for myself as well as anyone else, is join a political party. I kind of mentioned earlier that I have such respect, and really, really do, such respect for the people who have been out canvassing, who have been out kind of talking about the issues, and engaging with people on the ground, obviously having difficult, challenging discussions. And yeah, I have such respect for the people who do that as a way to try and deal with that. So I don't know if I will do it myself, to be honest, but it's definitely kind of given me pause for thought in the last few days, in terms of finding other ways to make a difference. So throwing that out there for everyone else to mull over and have a think about as well.
Love the question mark next to it. Join a political party?
Yeah.
I think I'm entirely with you, and I think you've spoken so eloquently in this podcast. I think just well done to those who ran, and especially in the face of increased sort of, let's just call it, hate. It's a lot to put yourself out there. It's a lot of hard work. You've got to go and find people to canvass with you, and yeah, just to echo what you said, like, well done to those who ran. Even if you weren't successful, we appreciate it, and we recognize how brave you are, and we need more people like you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Darragh for Taoiseach.
Oh, Jesus. Tom, thanks a million for stepping in again this week. Really, really great to have you, and great to chat to you.
Thanks for having me, and sorry to everyone that you didn't get your usual dose of Kira and Anna. I'm
once again, you're making this sound like it's your fault, Tom. All right, so we'll leave it at that. Just a reminder, if you do want to support the work that we do, you can do that on buymeacoffee.com/The Climate Alarm. And also, if you haven't reviewed the podcast yet, please do that wherever you listen, because that really helps us with finding new listeners. So that is it. Hopefully not too much talk about elections next week. Thanks very much, and goodbye.
Darragh for Taoiseach.